Good afternoon. Welcome to today's talk about Azure Synapse Analytics, which is a new service which you can use for data warehousing, data loading, and data analytics workloads inside Azure. In the beginning, let me introduce myself. My name is Marek. I'm a senior cloud solution architect working in Microsoft. I've written 2 books about SQL Server, which is very close to Azure Synapse Analytics, because Azure Synapse Analytics is, in the end, just a database solution which is offered inside of Azure services. So, what we will talk about today, we will see what Azure Synapse actually is and what Azure Synapse can do for you. Azure Synapse sounds as a new service, but in reality, Azure Synapse is actually a service which was here before, because Azure Synapse is based basically on Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which is a service which was here for a long time. Synapse just encapsulates the service with more features. So Azure Synapse Analytics is an analytical service. It's a limitless analytical service, which is very important. There's plenty of services in Azure, roughly 170 services which are out there. There's just a few services which don't have any storage limits. When we will go to provisioning of the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace, you will see that you actually have to define something what's called Azure Data Lake. And Azure Data Lake is basically one of the 2 services which do exist, which have absolutely no limits for storing the data. You can store as much as you can, as long as you can afford it, with the money, of course, but you can store as much as you can in those 2 services. One of them would be the Data Lake, and the second one was actually Azure Data Warehouse, which still does exist. It's like a version 1 availability, which is currently available. So this service brings together the Azure Synapse Analytics, brings together the data warehousing. It's built on top of the SQL database and big data analytics. Gives you quite a lot of freedom and a lot of potential to work with your data. So the data can reside wherever you need them. They don't have to be stored directly inside of the data warehousing solution. So you can access the data everywhere. You can scale extremely well, and you can even work with serverless infrastructure. We will see inside of the provisioning that there are more options for you, which will help you in terms of proper scaling and proper sizing of the service. Usually the data warehousing and big data analytics were 2 quite a lot of distinct worlds. And Azure Synapse bring these 2 together with a unified experience for loading the data, preparing the data, managing the data, and visualizing the data for immediate business intelligence, and if you need, also for machine learning needs. So it's a unified experience for you with a new service, which is Azure Synapse Analytics Studio. You can launch a studio, which you can use for all the services all together. So without any further ado, let's dive into Azure Portal. So let's do a demo. I will go to Azure Portal right away, and I will provision a service. And let's search for Synapse. And as you can see, there are actually 2 of them. Azure Synapse Analytics, which is formerly known as SQL Server Data Warehouse, and Azure Synapse Analytics, which is a workspace preview. So we will start with this formerly known data warehousing. So that's just basically a database on top of the SQL Server. It's a limitless database, so let's create such database. It will look very same like it actually looked as a basic database when we talked about Azure SQL databases on the deep dive last week. So we need to give the database a name. In here, the Azure Synapse Analytics doesn't call it a database anymore. It's actually called a SQL pool. But let's call this a data warehouse 02, for example. It requires us to have a server. So we need to have a server as a concept for the database. If there is no server, what you can do basically is go to the Azure portal and you can create a new SQL server. So I'll just show you how to do that. Let's do SQL server logical. So that would be just a SQL server. And the most important thing which you have to enter here is the name. So name is the most important part of the SQL Server provisioning. That name which you would enter here has to be unique because that's basically globally unique FQDN name which you need to use, which will, as you can see right here, which will be used for connecting to your server. Then just the location, username, password, and we would have a server. So I have a server already provisioned. It's in the North Europe data center, so we can choose the server. Now, with additional settings, we can just choose if to create a blank database, so no existing data, if we can use a backup, or if you would like to load a sample. Let's load a sample, so it will create a AdventureWorks data warehouse, a very lightweight version of a data warehouse. So let's go back to the basics, because there's one more thing which we need to check into, and it's this performance level. With performance level, let's select the performance level. As you can see, what's available as of now is performance level of the generation number 2. Generation number 1 is no longer available, but basically it's the same. The performance level is displayed as DWU. So it's actually a data warehousing unit. The data warehousing unit is a blended metric. So it doesn't exactly say how much of RAM, how much CPU, how fast disks, and how powerful networking adapters are available for your workload. It's a combination of the metrics, which do come as metrics for analytical queries, so CPU and memory intensive. It's a combination of metrics which come from create table as select query, which is extremely intensive on the networking and disk IO resources. So it's a combination of sorts. It's more or less the same concept as we have seen with basic Azure SQL database, where database transactional units were used. So this time, because we are creating a data warehouse, we are using data warehousing units. As you can see, the pricing is displayed in my case, because I'm using a European account, in euros per hour. If you would slide to the left or to the right, as you can see, the pricing would differ, obviously. So the lowest performance available is 100 DVUs. The highest, which I won't be even able to provision, is 30,000, where the price is a little bit higher, I would say. We have seen this as a price for monthly run for a database. This is for an hour with data warehouse, but it's extremely powerful. So I will use the lower performance levels just to save a few dollars here and there. And we can provision such database. The server is up and running. So what will be created is just the SQL pool. So if I will click on create, it will start provisioning a data warehouse. I have actually provisioned one data warehouse in advance. So let's check our server. This is the SQL Server. And as you can see on that SQL Server, I have a database. That's just a regular database. That's Azure SQL database, which is running with very low performance, 10 database transactional units. And I already have a data warehouse 01, which is a SQL pool. As you can see, I already have a Synapse SQL pool right here, which is online, which is running with the lowest possible performance. So let's click on that and let's check what's that actually doing. And what we can see here is it's a database, right? So we can connect to that database. We can see what server is being used. The database is up and running. And we have quite a few database settings here. So if I would use a tool which is called SQL Server Management Studio, which is a tool which is used for managing databases, as you can see, I can easily connect to that server. If I will disconnect and connect again, I can connect to that server. What you need to use as this SQL authentication. By default, you have to be careful. By default, the Management Studio would use the Windows authentication. That's not available in Azure as of now. So you have to use the SQL authentication. You need to provide the username. You need to provide the password. Hopefully I can remember my password, and let's try to connect. And as you can see, you're in. By default, that wouldn't work this way. I went actually to the system in advance, and I did a configuration here and there. So what I did actually, on top of provisioning the database, I have also configured a firewall on that server, because the SQL Server itself is doing one thing, and it's actually checking with these firewalls and virtual networks who can connect. So what I did is I did add my client IP address. That's my client IP address right now. So the system can recognize me. If that IP address would be missing, Management Studio would refuse to connect me and will actually ask me to sign up to sign into Azure portal to configure the firewalling rules. So that's one of the steps which I did in advance. So as you can see, the database is provisioned. We can connect to that database. The database is available. As you can see, we have already the pool 01, we have the pool 02. So both of them would be available right now. So let's expand this data warehouse. And let's check on the structure. Seems like a regular database, right? So it has tables, it has views, some external resources, programmability, storage, and security. So basically, if I would open this one database, it looks nearly the same. What's missing is just few things. It doesn't offer diagrams, it doesn't offer synonyms, it doesn't offer query store and extended events for performance troubleshooting. That's not available. But that shouldn't be any issue with that if it's not available. It's just a minor troubleshooting thing, which you can use for the data warehouse, but it's not mandatory. So when we have provisioned the database, as you can see, we can dive into the tables, and voila, we have the tables. We don't have any views, but the tables for the data warehouse are just there. So you can right click any table and you can just get the data, select the data, and the data will be served. So that's it. That's simple. Now, what is the huge difference compared to a regular database? Because I have a database in here, which has tables as well. It's the same adventure works. And I can see the customers in here, and I can see the customers in here as well. So this is just a common database. Data warehouse is the Synapse pool. The Synapse pool has quite a lot of advantages. And let's check the advantages which are actually there. The major advantage for Synapse Pool is it can store large volumes of data. And with large, I really mean large, like super large. Azure SQL database has a basic limit. And that limit is, depending on how do you set up the Azure SQL database, either 4, can be 8 terabytes of data. And if you consider really a big data solution, 8 terabytes really doesn't sound like a big data. That's an operational database. So with Synapse, you can store petabytes of data without any issue. You can consolidate disparate data into a single location, which is very important. So you can actually grab the data from different sources. We will see that later on as they come, and you can store all the data at one single place. You actually don't even have to store the data within the single location. You can just configure the access to the data from one single location without the need of moving the data to that location. What we can do is we can shape, we can model, we can aggregate the data. That's really powerful for the data warehouse. It's extremely powerful for batching, for batch loads. So let's load a terabyte into the SQL pool, into the Synapse pool. That works pretty well. You can perform query analysis across really large data sets. You can do even ad hoc reporting across the large data volumes. And you can use all that with just using simple SQL constructs. So basic select queries, which you would use with regular either on-premise or Azure SQL database. However, although there's plenty of advantages, there's also a few disadvantages at the same time. And there's quite a few things where the workload with Azure Synapse is really not suitable. So what's actually not a suitable workload for the Synapse? High frequency of reads and writes. Due to the nature of how the data is actually being stored inside of the Synapse pool, modifying the data a lot, so very frequent writes, doesn't do well. That doesn't scale well. It's not that performant for the database. It really doesn't work well. I'm not saying it can't do that, but it doesn't work well and fast, especially. This is mainly about performance. Large numbers of singleton select. So a select which is searching for one line inside of a table. That's not performing that well. What's also not suitable is high volumes of single row inserts. So inserting one by one. On the previous slide, do you recall, we've seen it does work super well with batch loads. So let's grab a huge bulk of data, throw it towards the Synapse pool. It will do really well. It's not used for data preparation, so any row by row processing. It doesn't work actually with XML pretty well because XML is performance heavy. It requires quite a lot of indexing to work really well. XML as a format, when it's stored inside of the SQL Server, is actually using 4 types of indexes. 1 primary and 3 types of secondary indexes can be created for XML. So that's why it's not used with Synapse, because we are here for analyzing really large bulks of data, not any XML documents which can be stored inside of the database. What we need to understand is why these high frequency volumes are not suitable for for the data warehouse. Let's go back to the portal. What you can see here is any usage of the data warehouse. You can see that even just a very simple query actually did spike the performance. So as you can see, we did actually something on the database. So there was a database usage. You can see if there are any active queries and what's the so-called workload group allocation. And there's several workload groups which are created. And this is a huge specific of the data warehouse. Data warehouse, if I will go to the Management Studio and if I will go to the security of the database, it has database roles. That wouldn't be surprising because SQL Server is commonly using the roles. However, there's quite a few roles predefined for you. Check on this. That's not there by default with basic databases. That's very uncommon for a basic database. And this is used for dynamic and static resource allocation. This is actually a very important thing, which is hidden inside of the performance. So if I will go to the server and I will try to create a new Synapse pool, here we have configured the performance level. The performance level has several effects, not only just the pricing. And inside of the performance, there's quite a few hidden perks in that configuration. Picture this. Whatever happens on the Synapse pool, so if you will run a query, that query will be all the time when you run a query, will be broken into 60, and that cannot be modified. It's always 60, into 60 distributions. This means that the query will be taken and split into pieces, which can be resolved by 60 different servers. And that 60 different servers is actually up to 60 different servers. So with the performance level which you set, if you are going to the lowest level, all of the 60 distributions are actually sent to just one single compute node. This actually means that you have 60-to-1 ratio. All the 60 distributions, they go to just one compute resource. With higher performance levels, the amount of available compute nodes is actually growing. And with the most performance setting, it's actually really 60 compute nodes. So each distribution, each part of the query is actually handled by different compute node for huge parallel performance of the data warehouse. That's why actually the batch operations, the batch loading, are doing such a fantastic job with the data warehouse, but only with the highest performance. And inside of that performance level, not only the amount of compute nodes is hidden, but there's one more thing which is very, 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 very hidden. And that's actually about something what's called slots for concurrency. Those concurrency slots, which are out there, is a concept how the data warehouse is basically limiting the amount of concurrent queries which can run at the same time. So if I will scroll to the left, to the lowest performance available, with DV100, you will get just 4 concurrency slots. And how many concurrency slots are occupied actually by a query is managed by these database roles. So if you do the settings with an inappropriate way, with the lowest possible performance which you have on the data warehouse, one user can actually occupy all 4 slots, and all the other users will be queued and won't be able to actually even process the data which are stored in the data warehouse. That's why actually it's not that suitable for the large number and high volume operations which you have inside of the database. That's why it's really not ideal. And these high volumes would be causing quite a lot of troubles for the Azure Synapse. Now, we know that we have Azure Synapse, which is already provisioned. But let's go to the portal one more time and let's create one more Synapse, Azure Synapse Analytics. And this time, let's go for the workspace. This is actually brand new. This is still a preview. It went public 2 days ago, so that's extremely fresh. So let's create a workspace. The workspace name has to be unique because this name, again, is globally available. It will be a global identifier for your connections. So I will use again my North Europe. As you can see, as of now, the list of data centers isn't that large. Yeah, just a few data centers where actually the Synapse workspaces, the preview version, are available. As you can see, what you need to provide is data lake storage generation 2. Now the data lake storage generation 2 is just a fancy name for data lake storage account. What you need to create is a storage account in Azure. So just a storage account. And while creating that storage account, the only thing which you need to change here is this one. You need to enable hierarchical namespace. Yeah, this one. This will create actually not a storage account, but it will create a data lake. So I already have a data lake available. So I will use my data lake account. I will have a file system on that data lake, which I can use. With security, you need to configure the login and the password for, and the password for that login. They should match. And that's it. Review and create, summary, and I can create the Synapse workspace. It will have a cost for loading. This is a loading cost for working with a terabyte. And this is extremely dangerous. If you're working with less than a terabyte, nobody cares. Yeah, so if you're loading 40 gigabytes, you still pay a terabyte price. I will not click create because I already have a workspace created. It will just take time, too much time. So I will just go to my workspace, which I have created in advance. So this is how it would end up with the workspace. Now with workspace, as you can see, I have a SQL endpoint. So It's sort of like a SQL Server. If you were watching carefully, you have seen we did not create actually a SQL Server this time. So I can just copy paste this. I can go to Management Studio and I can connect to that SQL endpoint. And just looks very, very similar to what we have seen before, right? So we have data warehouse, we have tables, we have views. As of now, it's empty because I have created an empty one. So where's actually a difference between the data warehouse, the database, and the workspace? There is actually no difference. This is like a version 1 and version 2. What we had was a database, the data warehouse. Yeah, that's formerly Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which is now called Synapse Analytics. On top of that, as preview versions, you have still the data warehouse. You have integration of Apache Spark. You have a unified experience with the studio and tools for data integration. This is called Synapse Analytics Preview. Once those features will go out of preview and they will be generally available, it will all merge as just one product, which is still called Azure Synapse Analytics. As of now, it may seem a little bit unclear, but the workspace is just an evolution of what will come to the database offering. So it will be all united. Because if you will go back to the portal, as you can see, what we have to create here is something called SQL Pool. If I will click on SQL Pool, guess what happens? We're just creating the data warehouse with the data warehousing units. Yeah, so it's the same what we did create before with roughly the same pricing. It's a little bit cheaper here, but roughly the same. So again, 100 of data warehousing units up to 30,000 of data warehousing units. So it's the same. I can create a data warehouse number 2. So it will be a pool name. As you can see, I can load the backup. I can load the restore point. It can be blank and empty. So I'll create a blank SQL pool. So let's create one more SQL pool. It should be created just pretty fast. But what we have here in advance is not just the SQL pools, because SQL pools we have had before. But what we have here as an addition is also these Spark pools. So what you can create as Apache Spark. Spark pool will have a name. Apache Spark pool 01. It will be a memory optimized VM supporting the workload. Can be either small, medium, large. Just these 3 offerings as of now. It's a preview, so bear with me. So you will choose, for example, small, auto scaling, at least 3 nodes. You can go to up to a lot, like 200 nodes. So that can scale, and you can imagine that this can really do a lot of big data processing, right? You have in-memory engine, super fast Spark engine, and you can actually distribute the load among 200 nodes. Obviously, comes with a price, right? Because you are provisioning a lot of VMs. I will not use auto scaling. I will just stay with just 3 nodes. I don't need any more. With additional settings, it can auto pause, which is a great feature. If you're not using that, it will go to the pause, so you're not paying that much. You can choose the version as of now, just 2.4, and you can upload any packages if needed. So I will create a Spark pool as well. So let's provision a Spark pool. It will initiate the deployment of the pool. So I'll go back to my Synapse workspace. So we will have a SQL pool, we will have a Spark pool. And what we have on top of that is Synapse Studio. So let's go to the Synapse Studio. And this is actually the unified experience you get with Azure Synapse Analytics. You have a data warehouse backed by a SQL pool and Apache Spark pool, to which you can ingest the data, you can explore and analyze the data, and you can visualize the data. So you can create new scripts, notebooks, flows, Spark jobs, pipelines, do a lot of import, and so on. And this is actually the unified experience you get. It's not anything new. If you will go to ingest the data, this may look familiar, this interface, because you're choosing a data source. And I would like to show you one thing. I will go to the portal and I will go to a service which I have created. And that service is Azure Data Factory, an orchestration tool which we have in Azure. As of now, it's version 2. There was a version 1 a few years back. And I will go to this author and monitor, which will open up Azure Data Factory interface. And after Azure Data Factory interface will load, I will go to a few simple tasks, like copy the data. It's one of the tasks which Data Factory can do for us. So it will load. Just takes a few seconds. So let's copy data. Can you see? Can you actually tell any difference between those two? So that's the rich integration, right? So all the cool features you had and which you had to configure manually in Azure Data Factory, they actually do come with the Synapse Analytics Studio. What you need to have here is you need to have a connection to any sort of data source you have. So let's create a connection, for example, to Azure SQL database I have. From our subscription, so we have just one server. It should load load my server. So this is the server, we have this database, let's authenticate to that database, either directly or use Azure Key Vault, which would be way more secure and it would be a way better practice, obviously. Test connection. Can we actually connect or not? Connection failed. Okay, that would be expectable because with that SQL server of mine, on the firewall settings, for sure, I did not allow Azure Data Services access. See, allow Azure Services and resources to access the server. Let's allow Azure Services. Okay, should be good. And let's try, we were here. Let's try one more time. Connection successful. See, that's simple. So you don't need to know what IP address is being used by Synapse, Data Factory, whatsoever. Just allow data service, Azure services, and you're good to go. So let's create the Azure SQL database connection. And let's tell to the Synapse, I don't need to store that from this database, I would like to copy the data. And here are my tables. So let's grab all these. Shouldn't be an issue. Let's grab the tables. Right. You can even see the preview, what's inside of those tables. Let's go next. You can configure the timeouts, isolation levels, do some validations. We don't need to do any of that. So let's just grab all the tables which we have inside with the database. By the way, when there was an error, the error was quite simple. If you would click on that error, it would tell you that you're actually you're not allowed access with your IP address. So that would be quite simple. So it's mapping our columns, it's mapping the data types. It's very simple, so most of them should match, shouldn't be an issue. Let's go to the settings. So few more clicks. So configure fault tolerance, if to skip anything, if to enable any staging, what would be a staging account? I don't need any staging. If to do this with a polybase, we'll talk about that a little later. Use the default types, if to configure the parallelism and whatsoever. Will not do this at all. So let's it's not blob storage, so we can't do polybase right now. Next, and we should be good. Let's click on next, and let's hope for the best. It should create a data set. It should create a pipeline in the background. It should run the pipeline in the background, and the pipeline actually did run. And let's go to the Management Studio, and let's check what happened. So far, nothing. And we have the tables here, right? So tables were copied from a database to the data warehouse. This shouldn't be surprising because basically this is just copying data from one database to another, right? So if we have the data ingestion okay, we did finish, we can explore the data. So we can see the data in here through the web browser, right? So we can see all the data which we have here. We can analyze the data. For analyzing, it would be super cool to have a notebook. With a notebook, you can choose the language of choice. So you can use Python, Scala, C#, Spark SQL. You can attach that language actually to that Spark pool, which we did create, and you can add a code. And now it's really about your code. So if you can code in the Python, you will import a lot of packages and you can do a lot of analysis on the data, right? So you can visualize the data which you have. You can do a lot of machine learning stuff in here and plenty of others. So this is actually something what Databricks as another service would be able to do a lot. And once you're done, you will simply visualize. See this icon? Should be familiar to you. It's just Power BI. So if you click on visualize, it will just tell you, let's connect to a workspace, or let's create a workspace if you have any. So if you have a workspace, let's connect to a workspace and let's publish the data set, and you can just do a lot of visualizations. With the loading, I would like to show you a few more things which would be available. For the loading, what we have seen was just loading from a database. It's not that fancy, but if we would, and in the beginning I need to do a setup, I need to create something what's called a master key, yeah, because it will encrypt some of the information. What we can do is we can utilize this external resources. For these external resources, I need to create data source and I need to create a file format. The data source will be a storage account. This is an Azure storage account. And inside of that Azure storage account, I will have a CSV files, which will be just delimited text, and the delimiter will be this pipe. So that's my definition. Yeah, so I have two external resources configured, external data source and external file format. And once I did, when I did that, I will just create two schemas on top of that, so I can properly store the tables. And what I can do is I can create a table. Let's say a table which is called customer. And that table is created as external. Create external table, dimension customer. I'm just configuring what's the columns inside of that CSV file, inside of that storage, in the folder which is called V1, in the file which is called dimension customer. So I will create such table. That table will be created. It just takes a very short amount of time, but still takes time. You can see it's done. And let's refresh the tables. It's not here. It's actually here in external tables. And we have external dimension customer table. I can even expand so you can see the columns. These columns would be in that table. And I can right click the table and I can select 1000 rows. And what actually happened as of now is the Synapse pool, which is running, doesn't have any data inside of the database. Inside of the database, it just knows where the data resides in some Azure storage account and what's the structure of the data. And I can still query the data with common SQL text. And that's why it's really a unified experience. It can be used for batch loading. So I can grab all that data which is inside of that storage account. And actually, I have created that external table. What I can do is I can create another table, which will be, as of now, internal. I'll decrease the size of the text a little. So create table. It will be already the wide word importers dimension customer. So it will actually use this external table as select from this external table. This construct, which is called actually create table as select, this one, is available only with Synapse, only with Synapse Analytics. You cannot use such query with on-premise SQL Server. You cannot use such query with Azure SQL Database. Doesn't work with managed instance or any other SQL type offering, only with Synapse Analytics. And what this actually does, it will create a table which will be already stored inside of that SQL pool. It will actually copy the content from the blob storage. You can use plenty of distributions. And in this case, replicate isn't exactly the, I would say, best idea. The distribution which should be used here as round robin for the loading. That would be way better for the configuration. But in this case, that's a little bit more complex, and we would need to uncover quite a lot of more information. It's actually even default. So I'll just change this replicate to round robin. That would be way better. So if I will run this one query, it will actually create a table inside, and it will start loading the information from the, as you can see, it's already created, and it has copied. Let's check how many actually. We can check on the storage of the table. It has, I actually don't see that right here. Lovely. It has actually copied all the tables we have. So if I would run the same select, it would obviously work. It has to. and it will be able to query the data warehouse directly. Let's just check what's the load on the data warehouse, if it was actually even doing anything, if it can see any activity. And as you can see, few queries here and there, we're roughly using 20% of the load which was available. So what you can do is, before the loads, you can scale. And you need to think about that really well, so you can scale the performance of the warehouse. When the loads are finished, you will just cool down the service again for cost optimizations. And there's one super important thing which you won't see with any other SQL database running in Azure. It's this pause button. So when you're done, you just click pause. The data warehouse, the Synapse pool, will be paused. We'll just take a really short time, and it will be paused, and it won't cost you a thing, because it will be just running just the Synapse workspace, but the workload in the background, as you can see, it's pausing, and it will be paused without any issue. Few more things. As you can see, by default, encryption is not configured for the SQL pool. On the SQL database deep dive, which was on air a week ago, we actually talked about the security features, and with the common databases, it's on by default. And there's one button which is very important as well. I can show you the button on another pool, which we have right here. So we have another SQL pool, and it's this one, restore point. It's not doing automatic backups for you as you may expect. It's not. So you can create your restore point. For example, before loading and after loading, you would have another restore point. So you have a user-defined restore point. You can have up to several restore points. There is a limit of how many restore points you can have. And do you recall when we were actually creating, it's created, when we were creating the Synapse pool? When we are creating the Synapse pool, one of the options was actually the restore point. So it was actually able to work with the restore points from, it was actually in the workspace. It was actually able to grab the restore point from the service, which is another very important thing. So you can check on the pools, what they do and how they work. With the data warehouse, what you need to understand is that the Azure Synapse Analytics is not a service which will be standing there alone. It's all about data flow. The data has to go in. You will process the data, and the data has to go out. So you will visualize the data. What Synapse brings you is the ability to do this all under one roof. So you have an integration tool for ingesting the data, which is actually coming from Data Factory. So you can get the data into the Synapse Analytics. You can analyze the data with Python, C#, Scala, up to you. So you can do plenty of analysis. And you can, once the analysis is over, you can visualize the data. And the visualization can be handled, for example, with Power BI, which is integrated into the service. One more service offers itself as an analysis service for the Synapse Analytics, and that would be Azure Analysis Services. If you like to create really an analyze the services experience, which you're used to from the common SQL Server. So that would be the introduction to Azure Synapse Analytics, which is a service which unifies the SQL, Apache Spark, Unified Studio for data integration, processing, and visualization. I know it was a quick overview. If we would have, if I should be covering all the features and all the aspects, I would need way more than an hour. But for a basic overview of what the service is and what the service does, I tried to cover it as much as possible. And I would like to open up a discussion. So if you have any questions, just don't be shy and just ask. GitHub, sure, there should be some. What I would recommend is just go to docs.microsoft.com and look for Synapse, and you will have all the tutorials directly on the Microsoft documentation. Same for GitHub. There are even several workshops for Synapse Analytics available on the GitHub. So if you will search for GitHub Synapse workshop, you will be able to find few workshops with sample data and all the guidelines how to actually go through the samples. Yeah, all the design concepts from data warehouse still do apply. So the hashing, round robins, replication, and so on. So far, we are in generation 2. So until generation 3 will hit in, and that's a very, very far future. So far, it's still does apply. It's just everything else is just built aside to that SQL analytics. So the core is still the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, now known as Azure Synapse Analytics SQL Pool, but still all the concepts do apply. I don't see any more questions coming to Q&A. Part 2. As of now, nothing is scheduled for part 2, but that's up for discussion. Okay, folks. So thanks a lot for bearing with me for an hour. That's it for introduction for Azure Synapse Analytics. It was a very nice time to spend with you, and I'm looking forward to talk to you in the future. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon.